as always. Our friends from New Zealand, Greg's down in
And give it one more minute, and then we're going to kick off.
Got quite a few Perth people, which is good.
Yeah.
We like that. We've got lovely Manoj from West Farmers.
Hi, good morning, Lisa.
Nice to have you here. We're going to see you, Manoj.
Okay, it's on my laptop. Let's open my laptop screen.
Yay!
Greg and Andrew, all the way from New Zealand.
Brisbane, just near me. Lovely, lovely.
Nice to see familiar faces and people and
Okay,
names.
guys, if you wouldn't mind just muting as I kick off and do an intro. We're going to continue to get people dialing in over the next couple of minutes, and I'll just let them in as we go. And thanks for all the notes where everybody is. You can see Melbourne, Brisbane, Brockman region, welcome. Seabird, just north of Perth, across the ditch in NZ. Bondi, obviously someone's from Bondi. Let Erin in at the same time. Okay, great. So my name is Chris Carroll, and I'm part of the mainstream group, and it's my pleasure to introduce Daniel Murray, our masterclass leader on managing risk and decision making with perspective taking. Now, for some of you, this is your first masterclass, and for others, you've attended several or many. In fact, there's somebody on you who's attended 12 over the last 24 months since we started the masterclasses. And for those of you who have attended before, you'll know that the content and topics very much vary from sort of hardcore technical engineering stuff like condition monitoring and best practice lubrication, through to more people-orientated education like leadership and managing teams and communication. And I think it's fair to say that despite the technical and engineering nature of most of your roles, no one on this call will be surprised that the desire for more people-orientated and communication-orientated content and softer skill education is increasing. In fact, we've just released our annual State of Asset Management report. I'll send you guys a link to this at the end of the call. And apart from the 11 hot topics that addresses, there's a lot of communication and leadership and people content and education required that comes across those topics. We'll send you a link after the call. Sorry, I'm just trying to let people in and mute and talk at the same time. There are a few people I need to mute. Okay, so a bit about Daniel. Dan has a unique background in that he bridges both technical systems and technical background with human psychology. He's worked extensively in mining, manufacturing, oil and gas, and other asset-intensive industries. He's also presented keynotes, workshops, and training courses for us at Mainstream, and has a deep understanding of industries like yours, and understands, obviously, from a maintenance reliability point of view, that you guys work in environments where single oversight or poor communication can lead to disaster with serious safety and financial consequences. So Dan, fantastic to have you with us. Very much look forward to the next hour and a bit, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Chris. And I'll get you to spotlight my screen if you can. That'll just mean that people can show the slides. I like to have the slides in my video feed rather than doing the share screen and then you see a big slide and you can't really see me when I'm talking to you. So we'll get that spotlighting up, and if you just click on my three little dots over my screen, it'll should give you the option to spotlight me there. But great to see everyone, and particularly those with your cameras on. It's always nice to be able to present to people, to faces, to hear your thoughts and expressions. And I'm going to really encourage you as we go through this session today to ask questions and pop those questions in the chat. The one challenge we're going to have is there's a lot I want to give you in 90 minutes. And so one promise that I'll make to you now is any questions you ask either during the session or towards the end, I'm going to capture those and I'm going to write out responses for each of those, and then we're going to distribute to everyone. So you get a really good opportunity to get a good response, no matter if we've run out of time or not. And I can make sure that you get what you need rather than us spending lots of time on this session. Is that coming up there, Chris? Can everyone see my slides okay, or am I still small? Still looks good? Wonderful. All right, let's dive on in. I want to take you back and talk to you about a project I did, which was pretty much the project of death. We called it. I was working in Australia, and I was a consultant. And yes, you can put the questions in the chat as we go. Absolutely. I'll give you some opportunity at the end as well, James. Thanks for your little chat question there. So I was working for a consultancy, and I was given this project where I had to fly across from Australia to New Zealand, work with this big bank there called ASB. And the project brief was really simple. The project brief was go over there and cut $130 million out of their budget. Good luck. And as you can imagine, this is why we called it the project of death. The Kiwis were pretty excited about an Australian flying in to cut their budgets by a big chunk. And it really taught me a lot, this project, around how do we manage people, how do we make good decisions, and how do we influence change when there's a lot going on. Now, the first thing I did was I actually said to the people there, I have no idea how we're going to save this money. I don't work here. I don't know your business very well. I have no idea. But I think you probably do. And so we created a whole bunch of principles and policies and thoughts, and we talked to people a lot, and we basically said, any idea you have to save money, bring it forward. We had this very large ideas wall where anyone who had any opportunities or any thoughts on how to save money, how to make things better, how to improve our organization could bring them and pin them up. And then we would promise to go and investigate those and do our best to bring them to life if they were possible. And one day, a post-it note or a note came up, and it said, let's get rid of the diaries. Now, at first, I thought they meant Outlook diaries, and that sounds exciting to not have any meetings. Who'd like less meetings in their calendar each day? I'm sure a few of you. It wasn't those diaries. It was leather-bound diaries that they gave to high-value customers. Anyone ever seen one of those before? You go, they give you the diary. It's got their logo on it, and we looked into it. They were spending around about $180,000 a year to design and manufacture and distribute and all that sort of stuff, these diaries. Now, when you're talking about saving 130 mil, 180,000 is not going to change the world. But my view was, if you're going to rebuild the house, you better sweep the floors. You got to clean up everything, don't you? And so this was an easy, quick win in my mind. And all we had to do was say yes, get rid of them, and move on. Because my thoughts, I don't know about you, my thoughts were about 90% of those diaries, they get used for doodling in the first few pages. People give them to their kids to draw in. They don't really get value the way that they should. So what I did was I took this idea to the senior leader who was in charge of that area. And I said to him, this is an idea we've come across. What do you think? Can we just say yes to this? And his response wasn't quite what I expected. I know there's a few of our New Zealand friends on the on the call today, and you'd probably pick this up as well. It was far less accepting than I expected. He said to me, no, we need to keep the diaries. The diaries are important and they must stay. Now, at that point, there was a whole lot of things going through my head. What do I do? How do I play with this? What do I do next? And what we're going to do through today is I'm going to ask you some of these questions, and I want you to answer. So I'm going to put in the chat a link, which makes it even easier, or you can go to menti.com and you'll be able to message in there. But let me do this. If you click on that link, this will bring up a little website, and you'll be able to put in your response. What would you do in this situation? You're trying to find $130 million of cost savings. You got this idea, which seems so simple and so obvious, and all of a sudden you've come up against this person who says no to the first thing you pop on his desk. What do you do next? What sort of response might you have? Give me a wave if that's not working, or if you're having any issues with the technical side. It should pop up. There we go. Ask them why they're so important to them. That's a good question. I love that. Yeah. Tariffs. Asking for ideas. Ask why you can't touch the diaries. Ask why it's essential. Absolutely. Has anyone ever found? Has anyone ever found that when you ask people a question, sometimes they don't give you the real answer? Has that ever happened to you? I'm sure it's never happened in any world of maintenance and your world, of course. People are very obvious and straight all the time. Is it important for each one? Ask them. Well, then, yeah, absolutely. So there's lots of different approaches we could take. But the things that were rattling around in my mind were, surely these aren't that valuable. Surely we can spend that money in better ways. And, how can I get across to this person without this being a really long-winded argument to make this work? Now, I'm going to tell you how it played out and what we did in just a moment. But as most of you have shown, having that bit of curiosity is really important in these times. What we're going to talk about today and what I really want to cover throughout today is things around why data-driven decision-making can be still problematic and fall short. We're going to talk about some of the psychological drivers of change, why in complex systems we need to consider more than just all the rational stuff. I quite like this idea that sometimes there's logical answers, and sometimes you find, has anyone ever found this, logical answers actually don't work? And what you need in those cases is psychological answers, things that talk to the people and the drivers of those people. We're going to talk a little bit around this idea of empathic perspective taking. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And of course, how do we then turn this into a culture where people do the right thing all the time? Because that is at the heart of the challenge you've got. My observation working in your world quite often is that the sensible, obvious things are very sensible and very obvious. Yet the mistakes and problems just seem to defy all logic. And what we want to talk about today is how do we solve those issues? It's not all of them, but there's a bunch of issues that fall into these categories, isn't there? And I want to touch on this idea of data-driven decision-making because Chris sort of alluded to this earlier. I've actually got a degree in mathematics. I don't always tell people that because sometimes they stop talking to me, but I love numbers, I love maths, and I love logic. And, what I want to challenge, though, is this idea that data-driven decision-making is the all-seeing, all-cure, it's the silver bullet, it's going to fix everything. And I thought about this a lot a few years ago. I was actually, some of you might know where this place is. Anyone want to put in the chat where this is? Anyone know where this is? Any other sad little middle-aged men in Lycra like me? No? This is my big fat bum, and I'm not going to show it any more time, so apologies. David Hamilton, correct. You get bonus points. This is the top of Mont Ventoux. For those of you who don't know, Mont Ventoux is a big mountain in the south of France, in the Provence region. It's very well known for cycling because it's about 20 kilometers from the bottom of the hill to the top of the hill, averages over 8.5% gradient, and it is absolutely torturous all the way up. I, of course, was a sad little middle-aged man in Lycra, decided to hire a bike and give this a bit of a go. And of course, I wasn't alone when I did this. I had my heart rate monitor and a smartwatch and a cadence monitor and a GoPro, and I had my GPS tracker, and I had all of this stuff to capture all the data because I like data too. And this is really important for us sad middle-aged men in Lycra because then we've got to upload it to a website like Strava so we compare ourselves to everyone else and, share it with our friends, even though they don't care. And we can get all this data to sort of make sense of the actions we take. Now, what happened was I cycled the hill. It took me 2 hours to do this climb. I got to the other side, rode down, went to our little Airbnb, uploaded my data, all excited. Oh, this is great. And when I looked at the data, something struck me. My data was completely unremarkable. I wasn't particularly fast. I wasn't particularly slow. Thousands of people do this ride every year. There was nothing in my ride that when you looked at the numbers was even interesting to look at. But what it made me think was, gee, that wasn't my experience. My experience was this was amazing. This was as good as it ever gets. This is the peak of my sad little career. And yet none of that data really represented that. And I think sometimes we forget when we're working in large organizations where there is lots of data, there are lots of numbers, and there's lots of moving parts that we can measure. We think that what we can measure is the most important stuff. But as soon as you drop people in, that can all change, can't it? Sometimes when you add people, the things that matter the most are unmeasurable. Things like culture, relationships, trust. These are things that are incredibly difficult to measure, aren't they? But vitally important. Has anyone ever tried to make change happen with someone who doesn't trust you? What chance do you have? And so when we go through today, I want you to be really thinking about the objective for today is how do we really look at these issues and solve these challenges where the measurement isn't actually not going to be the thing that's driving us forward. The measurement isn't going to be front and center. Actually, what matters are things that we can't measure. And I'm sure in your world, there are a whole bunch of things that really have influence over people that are very difficult to measure. So let's get back to the diaries and see how this played out. So there I was sitting across from this gentleman. I presented this obvious argument that we should get rid of the diaries. He said, no, they're vitally important. What happens next? Now, fortunately, when I studied mathematics, I also did systems theory. And in systems theory, there's a lot of very good guidance on what you can do to make change in complex systems. And when I thought through my options, they actually map quite nicely to this idea of systems theory. See, one option I would have had in that situation is maybe I could have implemented a constraint. I'd implemented a policy or rule. Maybe I could have said to the gentleman, all right, the budget for diaries next year is not 180,000, it's only going to be 90. Or let's go hard, let's make it, you only get 50,000 next year. We implement a rule or a policy, right? We do this quite often in organizations. What I've found in my own experience is that whenever you do that, there becomes a strong resistance to push that number back to where it was. Has anyone ever found that before? You put in a policy or rule and the resistance is to push it back to where it was because that's what we liked before. And if you don't look at it very carefully, within a couple of years, we're back to 180,000, maybe a bit more for inflation. So constraints can work, but actually they're not as powerful as we like to think they are. The second thing you can do is use feedback loops. Maybe we could have done a survey. We could have asked customers. We could have run a study to determine whether customers value these things. But again, we have to be very careful. If I ask you, do you want something? Do you value something? And there's no cost to you, often you'll say yes, even though the real answer is no. When you take things away from people, they don't like it. And actually running a feedback survey, for my mind, was time and money that we didn't want to spend. The third thing that has a big influence here is governance. So I could have very easily gone to the CEO and said, hey, look, these diaries don't make sense. Let's get rid of them. She would have said yes, and she would have ticked that box instantly for me. But what's the downside there? The downside of going over this guy's head would have been the relationship damage, wouldn't it? I would have been pretty much up for a fight from then on anything I took to him going forward. So there's a final thing that we need to think about when we want to influence change. And I think this is particularly important when you're looking at your work and how you influence all of those other people who really do have a big impact on whether you're successful or not. And that is to change the way they think about the problem we're dealing with. What I did with this gentleman, and I'm going to admit that this was a long time ago and it probably wasn't the kindest way I could have done this, but what I said to him was, okay, you can keep the diaries, but at that moment I slid a piece of paper across the table and I said, you can keep the diaries, but you need to give me 3 names. And those 3 names will be 3 people who we're going to have to make redundant and get rid of so that you can keep the diaries. See, the challenge here is not if we can save the money, it's where we can save the money. And if you believe we can make more money out of the diaries than those people, then let's do it. As I said, probably not the kindest way to go about approaching the situation, but it had the impact I was looking for. It reframed the question and the problem in the mind of that person, didn't it? Good news was ASB don't have those diaries anymore. That we actually saved $130 million through this process. Employee engagement went up through a cost reduction program, and they were the best bank in New Zealand for the following 5 years. And so often when you're thinking about how do we influence change, we too often go to the bottom of these levers, don't we? We too often race to what's a rule, what's a policy, what's a constraint, what's something I can enforce and put in place because it's logical, it's rational, it makes sense. But we have to consider when we're doing these types of interventions with human beings, making sense is not all that's important. Changing the way they think about the problem is far, far more powerful. And this is where when I think about these decisions we need to make and the way we're going to influence change, it has to be far more thinking from the view of empathy, of what's going on in the minds of that person, what's happening on the other side of the table, what are they experiencing in their world. And when I implement this change, when I try and impose some change on these people, what's it going to cause in terms of reaction from them? How's it going to help them? How are they going to see this problem? Is it me telling them, or is it us working together to make change that's better for everyone? And so this idea becomes very interesting. I love the term. I don't know if anyone's come across this term, strategic empathy, before. Has anyone heard the term strategic empathy? I'm going to frame it very simply. It's simply trying to understand why people do what they do, why they believe what they believe, what's going on in their world, so that I can have a better understanding to make better decisions. I want you to think about this as a process we go through to add on to data-driven decisions. I want you to take all the data and then think about, well, what are those psychological and personal impacts on the people, and how can I use both of these bits of data and information to make better decisions? And I often find these come to life so well in case studies. I'm going to talk about another bank only because I know we all love bashing banks. Who loves their bank? Does anyone actually love their bank? No. I mean, unless you're an investor, generally not. Lisa, you're smiling. I can see. So we'll bash the banks a little bit more. And I'm going to tell you about this scenario. I want you to imagine, I'm going to put you in the hot seat here. You're all going to be managing directors. You're going to be sitting there at the leadership table as this problem unfolds for you. You're deploying credit cards. You've got credit cards that you give to customers. And what happens with these credit cards is sometimes people don't use them. Now, what we found is that there's two reasons why people don't use their credit card. One is that they've forgotten it, lost it, misplaced it. They've just forgotten it exists. Right? The other reason is maybe they've got it as a safekeeping, a backup card, as an emergency facility there for them. And these two scenarios create a bit of a problem for the bank, because if it's scenario one, then we should cancel your card, not charge you any more fees, and close the account. But if it's scenario number two, we should keep it open, charge you a fee, and continue that service. The issue is, from the outside, it's hard to know which is which. So what we do is we send letters to these customers and say, hey, Lisa, we noticed you're not using your card. If you want to keep the card open, then just let us know. We'll keep the card open, no problem at all. Just come into the branch and tell us, and you'll keep the facility. Otherwise, we'll shut it down so it doesn't cost you any money. Right? We're sending this letter to these customers, and hopefully they'll respond. If they don't respond, we cancel the card. Beautiful. Everything's working fine. Unfortunately, we've just had major flooding, very severe flooding. And someone in our team says, hey, with all these floods, the letters might not work. This person, Sam, in your leadership team, comes in and says, hey, listen, these letters aren't going to work. We shouldn't send letters. What we should do instead is phone all these people, check in with them, make sure they're okay, see if they still need the cards, and see if we can help in some other way. Now, we actually ran this scenario with a bank, and we gave them 3 options. I'm going to give you the same 3 options here. The 3 options we gave, and again, you can go to that link and you can answer in here. The first option is you can do what Sam suggested. Stop sending letters and make personalized phone calls to all these people to check in with them and support them how you can. The second option is you just keep the cards open, keep charging the fee, and if the regulator gets upset, you just say, oh, well, it was a flood, so we didn't want to shut the cards down. Could get you in trouble, but, maybe you're being nice to the customers. And the third option we're going to give you here is just stop sending letters, right? Just, keep sending letters. They'll get them eventually. Maybe they'll pick them up at Australia Post sometime. But, we want to make sure that we just keep complying with the rules that we've set up. So what are people voting? Okay, so calls. One person sending letters, okay, but mostly calls. One person keep them open. A couple of people keep them open. More calls, okay. So there seems to be a fairly strong lean here towards this suggestion. Like we should stop sending the letters, make the phone calls, and sort them out that way. A lot of more people coming in now. I'll give you another second or so to answer that. And it's really interesting. So as I said, we ran this with a bank, one of the big banks. I won't say which one, but we ran it with one of the banks. We put 3,500 of their people through this scenario in small teams. So in small teams, they had to choose one of these 3, just like you did. I want you to have a guess now. Let's say you're working for a bank. Which one of these do you think a banker would choose? Which of these options do you think those people who work in the banks would choose? Well, that's interesting. Maybe we're much smarter than the bankers, apparently. We've got a different view. So a lot of people keep the cards open, charge them the fee, will make more money, right? Okay. Keep sending the letters, just keep doing what we've always done. So this dynamic's shifted very much, hasn't it? We've had a really rapid change between the two. And this might surprise you all. Of the 3,500 people we ran this through in those small teams, around 95% of the teams chose the first option. And 95% of the team said, you know what, we should stop sending letters and we should call them. They would even say things like, look, we know it's going to cost more and it's going to be hard to do, but it's the right thing to do to look after customers. Was that your logic? Was that sort of what you were thinking when you made this choice? It's interesting because this scenario was based on a real world scenario. In the real world scenario, the same bank chose to do exactly the same thing as you as well. The bank in question actually decided to stop sending letters and to make phone calls. Now, was this a good decision is our next question. Often what we find, and I'm sure you've found this, if many people choose an option, if you've chosen that option, you feel like you're part of the crew. You must be right. And in this scenario, you all chose the same thing that the bankers chose and the people in the real bank scenario chose. But is it a good decision? And this is where perspective taking can become really, really interesting. Let's think of the different perspectives that we could consider to determine if this might have been a good decision. And again, these are questions and perspectives we could take before making the decision, aren't they? The first perspective I want you to consider is a customer's perspective. Let's put ourselves in the shoes of those customers. Our house has been flooded. We've lost our possessions. We've got all of this damage. We don't know where to live. Things are in a state of absolute disaster for us. The phone rings. It's a number I don't recognize. Will they answer it? I mean, would you answer it? Was that the first thing you'd do? Answer the phone in the middle of all of this? It's a phone number I don't recognize. Has anyone ever had this experience? If they don't answer, what happens? Do you just keep calling them? How many times do you call them? How do you record all of this? How do you keep track of all of this? Who's doing all of these calls? Right, let's say they do answer the phone. Okay, we've got through hurdle one. They answer the phone. What's the first thing that any financial services, most organizations these days, that need to do before they can talk to you too much? They have to identify you, don't they? So the first part of this call is going to be, hi, Lisa. It's Daniel from the bank. Just before we start, can you give me your full name, date of birth, address? Yeah, the one underwater. And your mother's maiden name, please. What happened? What do you think now? Are they going to give you all that information? Is that going to be something that they're just going to happily dive into in the middle of this disaster zone? Let's say they do. Okay, we get through that hurdle, and these aren't small hurdles, are they? Now, what are you going to talk to them about? Their credit card they don't use? Do you think this is the top of their priority list right now? This is the thing they're thinking about the most? They probably want to talk to you about your home insurance, home loans, anything else other than this. Was that really a good experience for this customer at this moment? Let's keep going. What about an employee perspective? Do you have people sitting around twiddling their thumbs to make all these phone calls? Do they have the data to make the calls? Do they have the script? Do they know what to say to someone who's in distress? What happens when that person bursts into tears? What happens when this person breaks down on the phone and that trauma starts to come through and impact on your people? What do you do then? What about the perspective from the outside? How might this be picked up by the media? Could you imagine the headline? Horrible bank flogging credit cards to vulnerable customers during a flood. Well, we said this to one of the teams and they went, well, that wasn't our intent. And I said, well, I've always found that Carl Stefanovic cares most about your intent. Like, they don't care about intent, do they? All they care about is making a point. And you've given them a really good point for them to make. And so when we sit back and you look at those different perspectives, was your decision a good decision? Those people who said, let's stop the letters and make phone calls, was it a good decision now in hindsight? It changes, doesn't it? And all of these are perspectives we could have taken well before we made a decision. Anyone want to know what happened in the real world? In the real world scenario, our friends at this bank decided to do exactly what you did. They decided, let's stop sending the letters. They made that decision. That communication went through to the team, and that team stopped sending the letters straight away. They then said, let's set up a call center team and make all those phone calls. Then they dropped the ball. It was just miscommunication. The miscommunication meant that no phone calls were ever made. And 1,600 customers' cards were cancelled with no notification to the customer. They had the right intent, but again, the execution failed. And the way they found out was because customers would ring up and say, hey, why has my credit card stopped working? And their only response was, we're so sorry, we cancelled it. But you can apply for a new one. Terrible experience, right? And the problem when we go through these complex and messy scenarios, these complex decision-making processes, is when we're in them, they're noisy, there's lots of moving parts, and we have to do our best to try and navigate our way through this thick fog. But in hindsight, there's no fog. When we get to the decision and we look backwards, we look at these people, and this is what most people say, is these horrible bankers were terrible people and they cancelled everyone's cards, money-hungry grubs, right? When in actual fact, the truth was they were trying to do exactly what most of you tried to do. They were trying to do the right thing. But failing to think of these different perspectives and failing to consider the impact, the empathic and ethical impacts can create a real problem here. TK, you said you chose B. Unfortunately, the only issue with B is that the regulator will now be thinking you're breaching your fee for no service obligations, but it's a complex world. And I think one thing that I'd encourage you to do if you want to get better in this decision-making space, if you want to improve your ability to make good decisions in complex environments, is look at other people's decisions. Look at how other people have made tough decisions. Look at how the information that they had at the time or had access to at the time. It's very easy for us to sit back in the armchair of the future and look at the past and to talk about all of the terrible decisions people make. But the reality is we've got to try and take more perspectives and have more understanding in the moments. And this is where, when we fall back on logic and rationality, we fall back on simplicity and good intent, sometimes it can lead us astray. And so this is why I want to talk about this idea of empathy being understanding why people do what they do. And I'm going to possibly make an offensive statement, so don't hate me for it. But generally speaking, in my experience, people who are more analytically minded tend to think empathy is something that other people have. It's not really for us. Would you agree? Is that a horrible statement? Am I being offensive, David? It's something that I feel I can admit that I've grappled with very often. When you have an analytical mind and you think very logically and rationally, you can see empathy as this thing that, well, that's for other people. I've often heard people say to me, "Oh, I wasn't born with empathy. That's not me." And it's a really interesting challenge, because if you believe, as I do, that having empathy and understanding why people do what they do is really the biggest challenge in us solving most of the complex problems we're faced with, then it's going to have to be a skill we're going to have to get good at, right? If we don't understand those human issues, those human blockers that I'm sure you all face very, very regularly. Is anyone willing to suggest, or maybe you want to come off mute and tell me about it, where you've thought, hey, I'm just going to get these people to do this, and that'll be really obvious and easy, and then everything will work perfectly. And then you tell those people this very obvious thing, and they just don't do it? Has that ever happened to you? And you sit back and pull your hair out and think, why won't they do it? And who can I yell at? And who can we implement some rules? And what stick can I beat these people with? But the problem is that we don't understand why they're not doing it. Often we make up a reason. It's because they're lazy. It's because they don't like us. It's because of X, Y. We make up a quick reason, don't we? Has anyone ever done that before? But in my experience, what really drives people is much, much more profound. And empathy is trying to dig under that surface and understand what's going on there. Now, I found, like some of you maybe, that I wasn't naturally empathetic. I wasn't born with a special ability to understand other people's emotions, and it was something I needed to develop and work on. And so I went searching for this process. Is there a process we could use to build empathy? And sadly, I couldn't find a process. So I built a process, and I'm going to share this with you. And some of you might have seen this, and some of you might be thinking, gee, I need this. Some of you might be thinking, I know someone at home who really needs this. But you take away from this what is useful for you. The first piece of the puzzle, the first step in building empathy, is to be what we call consciously curious. This is probably the hardest, the most challenging thing that we have to do when we step into this space. Being consciously curious is an admission. It's an admission that I have assumptions, I make assumptions, I have predispositions to certain beliefs, I'm quick to judge things, and that sometimes will get in the way. Give an example of this. I'm going to show you a video. Again, it's only a short video. Bring it up full screen. Some of you might have seen this, but I'm going to show you this video. I'm going to ask you a question at the end. All right. Where am I? There I am. So, if you've seen that, just give me a little thumbs up if you have seen that before. I know, Lisa, you've probably seen that before, and Chris, you might have noticed. You might have come across this. I know, Steve, you would have. But others, if you haven't seen it before, then just pop into our Mentimeter. What did you just see? Give it a little description. How would you describe what you just saw? Simon saying Romeo and Juliet. Okay. Interesting. We've got a bully. Oh, that one comes up a lot. Lots of people say a bully. Domestic violence. Yeah, that's not uncommon. That comes up quite a lot. Shapes working together against the bully. Characters interrupting. Okay, small triangle protecting the circle. Big triangle protecting his home. His home. Interesting. Controlling. Yeah. These are pretty common, consistent sort of thoughts. An apparently aggressive large triangle seems to behave aggressively towards a small triangle. And okay, exclusion. This is really interesting. I actually did some work with some more coming in now with an engineering firm called Hall Contracting. Anyone from Hall Contracting on the call, or maybe not? But I did a session with them, and we showed this video, and a big burly guy at the back. He gave me the best response I've heard in a long time. He's had his arms crossed and sort of sitting back in his chair, and he went, "It's pretty bloody obvious, mate. You see, the big male triangle, he was beating up the littlies, then they ganged up together, ran off, so he got the shits and broke everything." And I thought this was beautiful because my response to him was, "That's really interesting." And having studied maths for a really long time, I'm still not sure which part of the triangle do you lift up to check its gender. There's no male triangles. Someone said there's no male triangles don't have gender. Right? You didn't even see an angry triangle. You didn't see a bully. You didn't see aggression. You didn't see any of those things. All you saw were shapes moving around. That's all you saw. All that was on the screen were shapes moving around, and you came up with all that stuff. Where did all this other stuff come from? You made it up. And how easy and readily did you do that? Now, where this becomes really interesting and problematic in our worlds, particularly our workplaces, is that we collaborate, we sit with, we work with people who are a bit like us, and they see the world similar to us. And so what we can do is we can see a scenario, we can see we've asked someone to do something a certain way and they won't do it. And then we make up a story in our minds as to why they're not doing it. Have you done this before? Then you talk to someone who's like you talk to your collaborators, your friends, and you tell them the scenario, and they magically see the same thing you saw, and both of you go, we're right. How clever are we? It is their fault. It is them. They're the issue. And we sign off on it real quick in our minds, don't we? Have you done this before? You see, the challenge we have is that we don't all live in the same world. We all have these mental models, these sets of beliefs and heuristics and frameworks and experiences that shape the way we see the world. There was no bully. There was just a triangle moving on the screen. But our predisposition, our mental models, these frameworks that we have in our mind immediately give those things meaning. And you do that to people at work all the time. You know, you walk into the office and there's someone sitting there with their arms crossed, and your mind, you go, "Oh my God, Bill's got his arms crossed. Oh no, I saw this lady on TV that said arms crossed means he's got the shits, and oh, he must have the shits with me. Maybe I didn't write regards on that email yesterday. Oh no." Well, it's good. And then I go and talk to someone in the tea room. "Hey, did you see Bill? Yeah, Bill looks like he's got the shits. Oh my God." Right? We start creating this story. Turns out Bill's just sitting under the air conditioning. It's a bit cold. Leave him alone. The reality is our world is complex. And your brain doesn't like complexity. It likes simplicity. It likes answers. It likes to find patterns. And this is exactly what we do all the time. We look for the patterns, particularly the ones that fit our beliefs and our story and our mental models. So when you're going into a complex system, being consciously curious is really important. Being consciously curious is saying, I have beliefs, I have views, I have experiences here, but for the moment, I just want to push those aside. I'm going to park them. What I really want to do is just have an open mind, a blank sheet of paper, and just curiously try and understand what's going on. I just want to gather as much information as I can. Be that data, be that emotion, be that conversation, whatever that might be. And if it's trying to understand what's going on for another person, I need to park all of my pre-existing beliefs and just try and talk to the person openly. That being consciously curious is very easy to say and very hard to do. And I'm going to suggest to you, you won't be able to do it all the time. Actually, it takes a lot of effort to do. But when you need to make an important decision, when you're working with someone you haven't worked with very often, when you're faced with a really complex scenario, this is a really, really important thing to do. Because the second step in having empathy is to openly explore. Ask questions, gather information, try and get more data points and information points to help me make better decisions, to help me understand. And the reason why being consciously curious is so important is if I'm not consciously curious and I step in to explore, what sort of questions do I ask? I ask the questions that try and validate my own perspective, don't I? I try and ask the questions that make me right. This is what we do as human beings. What's even more challenging is in complex industries like yours, where there's lots of jargon, there's lots of acronyms. Who loves a good acronym? Oh, don't we love them? Throw them around like crazy. What happens in these complex environments is we ask questions that we understand to validate our opinions, but we ask them in a way that the other person has no idea what we're even talking about. What I find really interesting as a consultant is often I'll sit in meetings and there'll be a leadership team and they're talking about something and they'll be throwing an acronym around, and I'll often go, sorry, can we just pause for a second? Don't want to be a pain. What does an ARC mean? And often what I find most interesting is not the answer, but it's how many other people sort of lean in to listen because they have no idea either. We need to have curiosity. We need to be okay with not knowing, because it actually makes the exploration process far, far more beneficial. Now, exploring's hard. Understanding other people's decisions and the way they see the world is challenging. I'd agree. One of the things I often find, again, give me a little maybe thumbs up or a yes in the chat if this is something you found. Have you ever come across that situation where someone does something and your immediate thought is, why the hell would they do that? What sort of stupid idiot people are these that do something that doesn't make any sense? That's so dumb. Some of you might be thinking, yeah, there's an orange guy in the Oval Office that seems to do that regularly. Others find them in other places. But yep, it happens, right? I'm sure you see it sometimes, Chris. So you get into the scenario where you see someone do something, you go, that just doesn't make any sense. Who are these idiots? I do that myself. It's very judgy. It's very fast, but it's not very effective. And so what I did is I built this tool that I want to share with you called the perspective taking tool. And it's very simple, very easy to use. And it's a simple map that we can use to try and understand why someone would do something that we think silly. What we do is we put that point of view, that perspective in the middle, that thing that we think is a bit weird, strange, and then we interrogate it by trying to think, are there any rational, emotional, structural or cultural policy or people drivers that would cause someone to think this way? And I'll give you an example of this just to bring it to life, if you like. Now, this example I'm going to give you is something that it's a behavior that when I first saw it, my initial response was, this is stupid people doing stupid things, right? It's very judgy. I'm going to admit it. Also, you might have done this behavior. So apologies. I don't mean any offense. I still love you, but you might have done this. And so don't get mad at me if this was you. It was the great paper hoarding of 2020. Does everyone remember that? one of the beautiful things that COVID gave us was these incredible images of people punching each other over toilet roll in the Woolworths car park and other places. It was, my initial response was, that's just stupid. Like, dumb. Why would people do that? That doesn't make any sense. But when I thought about it, I'm like, well, that's a fast assumption and judgment, but it's not particularly useful, is it? You know, if I was trying to influence change over people who were doing something that I thought was silly, saying to them, hey, silly person, stop doing that stupid thing, is that likely to get me the outcome I'm after? Probably not. And again, you might have had not dissimilar circumstances or situations in your world where you're like, well, just stop doing that thing. Why would you do that? What's wrong with you? But what we need to do is really start to say, well, what might drive someone to have this belief, to take this action? And the way we use this model is to go, well, are there any rational reasons, rational drivers as to why someone might do this? Well, yes. Maybe they feel like it's a need. They need toilet paper. Could be that shelves are being emptied, right? They see that, and that could be a reason. It's not particularly reusable toilet paper. Like, that's not a good way to go. You can make your own, but it's pretty rough, if you know what I mean. Not very comfortable. And it's not like you can just stop. Like, you can't just dose up on Imodium and ride this wave out for 6 months. That's not going to end up pretty, is it? Now, you might look at those rational reasons and go, yeah, but they're not very compelling reasons for me. That's fine. This isn't about you. This is not about convincing you that this is okay. This is not about changing your mind or your perspective. All we're doing is trying to identify, are there drivers that could cause someone to have this behavior? Yes, there are. Are there emotional drivers? Absolutely. Could be fear of missing out. Could be a sense of embarrassment. Could be greed, right? There were definitely, lots of people who were suggesting it was greed being driven, but it could also be a love for my family. I don't want my kids to not have it. I don't want my wife to not have it, whatever it might be. And just think about this for a second. Imagine if someone's doing this out of love for their family and you accuse them of being greedy. Where's that going to get us in terms of this ability to influence change? Not very far. It could be a sense of justice. It's not fair that I have to do this. It's not fair that I don't have. And if there's one thing, particularly in your world, when you're trying to influence change and make really tough decisions that you need to be conscious about, it's this idea of justice, fairness. Humans are incredibly sensitive to fairness. Now, again, these might not be very compelling reasons to you, but this is not about you. If we go broader, there are structural things going on. There was a pandemic, supply chain, shelves are being emptied, right? All of these things have influence, don't they? There was policies in terms of movement restrictions, isolation laws, purchase limits being put in place. These could influence that behavior. Absolutely. Culturally, I was living in Sydney at the time. And, if people share, it makes the news. We have quite an individualistic type culture sometimes, don't we? This sense of entitlement, a lack of sharing, first in, first served. This is going to influence people. And certainly other people have a big influence on us, don't they? So maybe it was a spouse or children complaining or people I hear on the news or politicians. Now, the point of this model is not to get it right. It's not for us to say, oh, now we know why everyone would do this behavior. The point of this model is not to change them. It's to change us, isn't it? Because before, what was I armed with? I was armed with my quick judgment, stupid people doing silly things, which was fast, very judgmental, but incredibly useless. Now, what have I got? Well, now I've got a world of different possibilities. I've brainstormed a whole bunch of things that could be driving someone to have this behavior. And if I want to influence change, if I want to understand more, if I want to talk to someone about this behavior, I've got so many more starting points, don't I? So many more places where I can go and ask questions and dig and try and understand and empathize with this person. And this is really, really important when you're trying to make change happen. If you are trying to make decisions which influence huge amounts of change in your organizations, which you have to do all the time, right? Then if you don't understand why they do what they do now, it becomes incredibly difficult to make that change possible. Your ability to understand people who are very different to you, who work in different worlds to you, who see the world in very different ways. Your ability to flex and change and understand them is your power. It's not your knowledge. It's not your expertise. It's not your rank. It's not your title. It's not what car park you have in the parking slot, right? None of those things really matter. Your superpower is your ability to understand what drives them. And a tool like this can be incredibly useful, particularly in teams. Has anyone ever, this happens a lot in government when I work with government agencies, but I'm sure it never happens in your world. Someone up high makes a decision that comes down to you and you look at it and go, this doesn't make any sense. Why would we do that? Who are these idiots up there? Anyone ever happen? Don't admit, don't point, that's rude. But when that happens, instead of sitting with your team and going, yep, look, these guys are idiots. Oh, can't believe they're doing this to us again, which feels nice, but is incredible, and it's very easy to do, but incredibly useless. We could sit down and draw this map out and say, hey, team, what do you think's driving that decision? What could be going on that would make this happen? And what you'll find is that there's lots of reasons. There's lots of things going on. There's lots of possibilities. And again, your objective here is not to work out the right answer. It's not to change them. It's to change us. Absolutely. Ask for context. But this is where it becomes interesting, James, because how we ask and what we ask becomes far more challenging sometimes. The context, is something that, let me put it this way. I've seen many times in organizations where someone makes a decision like that and the response is, why would we do, the response from below is, why are we doing that? That doesn't make sense. That's stupid. Why do we do it that way? What we should do is this instead. Anyone ever seen that happen? Gee, that falls flat quick, doesn't it? It usually gets swatted down really fast. Instead, if you went and said, hey, look, I'm thinking about this decision that you've made. And I imagine there's a whole bunch of different drivers. I was thinking, is it, maybe it's something around this or something around this, or maybe it's this, or maybe it's this. I'm not sure which it is. I'd love to have a conversation, though, and understand more from your perspective. What we need to be able to do is open up that door for real conversation. And if we do the work before, we take some responsibility for having more perspective and taking a more open mind, it puts the power back on us. Now, this idea of openly exploring is important because it allows us then to change our minds. It allows us to think differently about the world around us. It allows us to have different perspectives and different ways of looking at the people you work with. And if there's one thing that's so vital when we're about to make a decision, it's really making sure that we're thinking about the other person. We're thinking about what's going on in their world. We're thinking about the impact it has. Because you can make a brilliant decision with all the logic in the world. But if someone on the other side of that decision feels like it's unfair, what happens? I've seen so many really good decisions being undermined, white-handed, torn apart, and people sitting there going, well, because you haven't treated me fairly, I'm going to make sure your idea fails. Anyone ever encountered that before? Because you've told me to do it, and I don't trust you, you don't respect me, because you told me to do it, I'm going to make sure it absolutely won't work. And we have to remember humans are very quick to cut off our noses to spite our face sometimes, aren't we? And we think back to our influences of change. Yes, you can put in a rule. Yes, you can put in a policy. Yes, you can employ governance. But you know as well as I do, until they want to be part of that change, until they believe that change makes sense, there's very little chance it's going to work. And so this idea of changing our minds and improving our perspectives and making better decisions is what I mean by leading with empathy. Leading with empathy is not making friendly, fun decisions that everyone likes. Leading with empathy is not making sure there's cupcakes in the tea room, and it's not making everyone happy and making sure everyone's your best friend. None of those things are reality. Leading with empathy is taking more information to make better decisions, gathering more understanding so our decisions can influence people in a more fundamental way. Leading with empathy is about understanding so that we can influence change. And this is where the final step becomes really important. What people tend to do is they tend to then tell people what they should do. We might make a decision, we might go through a lot of thought process, and I've seen this happen many times. A leadership team or a team, they spend weeks, months, years sometimes on a project to really research and understand something, and they pull it apart and they do all this analysis and they get all this new data and they get consultants coming in and all go through all of this work. And then they turn around to the people who are actually on the front line and just say, hey, stop doing that stuff you did before, do this instead. Have you seen that happen? There's no context. There's no understanding. There's no communication. There's no journey for that person. That person doesn't understand why. And so what we need to do in this scenario is make sure that we're inspiring curiosity in them. We're asking them questions. We're telling them stories. We're sharing information. We're putting it into a framework, an understanding, and a perspective that resonates with them. People shouldn't do things because you tell them. People should do things because they're the right things to do, and they want to do the right thing. And that difference is very, very small. Logic and rationality, ignore that. It has nothing to do with this scenario, does it? But the difference between people doing things because you told them and people doing things because they think, they believe, they care that they're the right things to do, that gap is massive. And in your organization and many others in your whole industry, there are millions and millions of dollars being lost because we're not closing that gap. In my view, this is one of the biggest challenges that we face. How do we get people to care about their work? And so this is where I want to step into this idea of, okay, how do we make this part of our culture? How do we make this part of the way we work? And again, this becomes an interesting area as to where data just leaves us so short. The numbers, the figures just don't hold up. I'll give you an example. Has anyone heard of Deepwater Horizon? I'm sure many of you would have come across Deepwater Horizon, one of the biggest catastrophes, environmental catastrophes in history, where the oil platform in the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America. Ugh, sounds horrible saying that. In the Gulf, that oil platform ruptured. They had an explosion and it leaked millions and millions of tons of oil into the Gulf. It was a terrible travesty. What's really interesting when you go back and look at the case study, and I'm sure many of you have, is that platform hadn't reported an incident in 7 years before that happened. Did you know that? They had no recorded incidents, safety incidents, in 7 years. Why? Well, it's an interesting question, isn't it? Because, the first thought was, well, maybe it was super safe and there weren't any incidents. Let me ask, in your world, is that sensible? Does that logical? Does that make absolutely anyone think that that's true? No. What there was, though, is there were lots of incentives for recording low rates of incidents. And so people didn't talk about incidents. They hid them. There were actually fires reported on board the platform by the Coast Guard, but no incident recorded inside the organization. And this is what happens when we focus on results instead of behavior. If we try and manage just by numbers, if we try and motivate and incentivize just on results, you have to be very, very careful. Because humans are very good at finding ways to get really good numbers through really bad behaviors. Have you found that before? Happens all the time. We find shortcuts, we find easy ways around, we find ways of getting good numbers through bad behaviors. And what we know and what Deepwater Horizon proved, if we keep doing that, if those behaviors keep eroding our organization, eventually it will explode. It happened to Deepwater Horizon. It happened so many times throughout history. And it's really incumbent on us to be making sure that as leaders, we focus on those behaviors, why people do what they do. This becomes really interesting, though, because the question I guess we have to ask is, how do we make sure we're making good decisions? And what is a good decision? Let's think of it in these two dimensions. And decisions that we're going to make, we're going to think of them objectively and subjectively. So objectively, they can be inside the rules, policies, and laws, or outside, legal or illegal. But subjectively, they can be right or wrong. And it's interesting to think about these two as a bit of an intersection here, because what happens is we get these two spots which are very obvious, right? It's the right thing to do and it's in the rules. Good for you. Well done. Probably don't need you to make that decision. And also there's things that are illegal, outside the rules, and wrong. Okay, that's a bad decision. That's obvious. The real challenge for us as leaders is, how do we make decisions in those other two quadrants? How do you make decisions when it sort of feels like it's outside the rules, but it's the right thing to do, or vice versa? I'll give you some examples. At the start of the pandemic, Uber had set up a Zoom call with 3,500 employees, and within 4 minutes of that Zoom call starting, fired all of them. Now, it was legal. It was inside the rules, well within their policies and contracts. But do you think that was a right decision? What's going to be the impact on all the people around them afterwards? Do you think most people at Uber after that thought, oh, I'm going to brush up my CV and start looking for other jobs? I bet they did. What about things that aren't inside the rules, but they're the right thing to do? I had a good example here, a client where they had a bereavement policy. They said, if your direct family member passes away, then we'll give you 8 days of leave. Doesn't come off your holidays, not out of your sick leave, it's bereavement leave. But this gentleman came up and said, well, look, my auntie died, which is outside the policy, but my auntie had actually raised me since I was 2 because my parents were killed when I was young. What do you do then? Now, it's outside the rules, but is it right or wrong to say yes to that decision? And in these moments, it's really interesting. In that case in particular, we had people inside that organization saying, no, we can't say yes to that person, because then everyone will say, oh, but my great aunt, who I haven't seen in 20 years, she died, so give me 8 days as well. And this is where you as leaders need to make tough decisions that don't always fit into these black and white categories we like. This is where, in my perspective, your values become vitally important. What do we stand for? Who are we? How do we do things around here? What do we collectively believe is the right thing to do? Now, just give me a yes in the chat if you're actually in the chat. If you know all of your organization's values, then just maybe chuck them in there. I'd be really interested. If you don't know them all, or if you're thinking, gee, I'd have to look them up on an intranet or a wall, is there a poster somewhere? Then, we might be in a bit of a challenge here. Because if you don't know them off the top of your head, if you don't know them intimately and really can recall them straight away, my challenge to you is, how are you using them to make decisions? How are they guiding you in these tough spaces when you don't even know what they are? And just having these words is not even enough. I'll give you a good example of this. Here's some companies that I've worked with very closely, and some of the values that they espoused: integrity, service, courage, achievement, one team. Sounds good, doesn't it? Integrity, again, this second company, collaboration, accountability, respect. The third one, interestingly, integrity again, collaboration again, excellence. In my experience, these are pretty common. These are what you see a lot of organizations have as their values. Anyone want to guess who these 3 organizations might be? Turns out these were the values of three of our big four major banks before, during, and after the Royal Commission into Banking. These were the values of these banks when people at some of these banks were charging dead people for financial advice. And when they were told to stop doing that, said, no, I think we can. It's okay. And so this is the challenge I always have when we start talking about values. We have nice words. We have words that sound good. But my question is, are you really using them to guide your tough decisions? Are they built in a way that you can really sit with your team and make those tough decisions, make those tough calls? Say, hey, look, I'm going to grant this person bereavement leave because it's the right thing to do. And when someone else says, oh, my grand auntie, who I didn't know very well, says, well, that's not fair, I'm going to say, it's not about the rules. It's about the policy. It's about the values. It's about what matters here. It's about what we believe in. One of the things that I want you to think about, and if you're looking for ways to sort of bring this to life, I'm going to suggest to you that there's a really simple thing you can do. Turn those values you have, and I thank everyone who's popped them in the chat. I can see those, some really good ones in there. What I really want you to do, though, is start turning those words and those short phrases into things that really matter in your specific team, for your people in your environment. And what I would recommend you to do is start to translate these into statements for your team, with your team. I often run workshops with teams where we sit down and work this process through. And our objective is we want to start to create a collective set of statements that start with the words, we will always, or we will never. Now, what this does is it takes these words, like, say, accountability, and it starts to turn it into a behavioral phrase that I can commit to. The challenge with a word like integrity is, of course, you should have it. Right? What's interesting about the word integrity, I often pick on it because, of course, you should have it. I get suspicious when people tell me that they have to, that people have to think, they have to tell me they have integrity. That worries me. Doesn't it worry you? I mean, what's interesting is no one there has said legal, we comply with the law. Why don't you have to say that? Does it mean you don't comply with the law? No, because you go, well, of course we comply with the law. Well, of course you should have integrity, right? Instead, I want you to start turning these phrases into statements that say, we will always or we will never. And the always or never here gets really uncomfortable for people. So by collaboration, do you mean we will always work diligently to help our partners succeed? And we will never do something ignoring the needs of others. Is that what you mean? Now, maybe it is and maybe it isn't. I don't know. But if you can't sit with your team and be really clear on what that means, then we create this gray area. And you know as best as I do that those gray areas are where we get so many of our issues, don't we? So many of those behavioral problems that we struggle with so often. I was working with an organization and one of their values was brave, which they thought was very good. You could say courage, right? Now, in a meeting, a person was aggressive and really rude to a colleague. And when they were confronted about it, this person said, well, I was just being brave. You see the problem? Until we can translate those words, when you say connect, what does that mean for your people, in your world, in your space all the time? What's a commitment we're going to make? And the beautiful thing about making these commitments, which sounds so simple and so easy, the beautiful thing about making these commitments is we then start to set expectations. People know what to expect of us. And people get very scared about this idea of expectations. Oh, no, but if I set these expectations, then maybe I'll get it wrong. Maybe we'll miss. What happens if we miss? It's actually really easy. Firstly, you will miss, you will stuff up. You will say something to someone, you'll say, let me take another one, maybe recognition. You'll say to people, we will always recognize everyone's involvement and make sure we give them the credit they're due, right? That could be an easy statement to make. And then one day you'll forget to thank someone who you should. That will happen. And therefore, you don't want to say always. You want to sort of leave it a bit vague, and so you don't fall into this little issue. No. Instead, make the commitment. We'll always do this. We will step up and support. And if you get it wrong, if you stuff up, then you say sorry. You apologize, you own your mistake, and you make it right. Let me give you a scenario. Let's say in my team, we've made a commitment that we say respect is a good one. So that means we're always going to respect the opinions of others and create space to listen to them. Okay, this is the commitment we're going to make. We always are going to listen to our peers and create space for them to speak. Now, let's say I'm in a meeting with you and I don't do that. Right, I cut you off. I'm grumpy, whatever, and I shut you down and you don't get to speak. I've broken my commitment, haven't I? Afterwards, though, I don't say anything. I make excuses or I just ignore it. How does your trust in me now change? Your trust goes down, doesn't it? Right? I've broken my promise and I didn't say anything about it. Let's say I still do the same thing because I'm a human. I'm going to stuff up every now and then. I'm going to have grumpy days, whatever. Right? I do exactly the same thing. But this time, after I've done that, about an hour later, I call you. I go, hey, James, mate, I'm just reflecting on that meeting. I was really rude. I cut you off. I shut you down. I didn't listen. I'm sorry for that. I'd love us to catch up again so we can make this right. What happens to your trust in me now? It goes up. Because now you know that I am going to stuff up because I'm human and we all stuff up, but at least I have the humility to accept it and fix it. And so making these statements for your team, having these commitments is incredibly powerful and an excellent way to make sure that you and your team have clear expectations of each other, how you're going to show up and how you're going to behave. And again, these start to set the boundaries of how your team will make decisions. And I'd encourage all of you to start to look at those values you've got and start to try and translate them into these always or never statements. Because saying a word like integrity, it sounds nice. But what do I do with that? Where are the boundaries? What is and what isn't? And if it's open to interpretation, how are we really making sure we're on the same page? Let me pause for a little second and open up for some questions. We've only got a little bit of time left, but if you've got any questions, either pop them in the chat or you can put them into the Mentimeter and they'll pop up on the screen. You might have questions that you want to send just directly to me. You can do that as well in the chat. I'll happily open up to there. But I'd really encourage everyone to be thinking about those different perspectives and how they can use those in those decision-making frameworks that you have to work through. And even if you want to ask a question later, then please feel free to pop that in that Mentimeter at any time. And as I said to Chris earlier, we'll capture all those questions. I'll give you a thought out and a longer form answer if you like, and we can email those all out as a little PDF afterwards for anyone who wants those as well. The other thing I'd ask you to do is give us a little bit of feedback. So you can use the QR code, or I can give you a link. QR codes are so 2021. There's a link in the chat as well where you can jump in there. It'll ask you a few questions. How did you find it? All those sorts of wonderful things. Don't worry, we won't bombard you with emails or spam you. So happy to do that. Let me have a look. He's got some questions. Wonderful. Thank you, James. Josh, you would still use the point of view in regular conversation. I think it's great. but time obviously allows. Absolutely. Look, Josh, I probably wouldn't use it in real time. I think I'm going to use this as a horrible opportunity. I've got a book coming out late end of July that talks about this a lot more. But one thing I'd say is when you are in conversation, it is important to sort of take that time to think, wonder why that person's saying that. One of the things that happens too often in conversation is we don't like space. And anytime there's a gap, we try and fill it. And so I think in conversation, there's two things I'd probably suggest really quickly off the top of my head. Firstly, don't rush to jump on in. Often if you ask someone a question, they'll give you a short, convenient answer. And if you leave space, just don't say anything, they'll then give you a much longer, much more comprehensive and interesting answer because they want to fill that space. So one big tip in having conversations is shut up and listen. The second tip I'd have is don't be so eager to jump on in with a response. So what we tend to do is someone starts talking, they say something, and our brain goes, no, wait, stop. I want to talk about this. And in our minds, we're thinking about what we want to talk to them about. We're thinking about a response. Unfortunately, as soon as we start thinking about our response, we stop listening. We can't do those two things at the same time. So as much as we can, try and pause that need to respond. Even if you write it down in a little note, say, hang on, just let me write something down. Okay, I'm listening again, and continue the conversation. You'll get a far better a range of answers, if you like, in my perspective. All right. Many thanks for that. Great, wonderful. Yeah, look, people are hard. People are tough. People are challenging. So the more we can listen to them, the better. But look, from my perspective, thank you all very much. It's been a real pleasure working with you today. And I'll hand over to Chris.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. I know Lisa's dying to say a few words just in closing to everybody. But Dan, thanks so much for sharing your experience and your wisdom and putting it so simply as well. And I just thought I'd let you know, and everybody, a few of the people I know on the call, I've just asked them throughout the call to share some examples where they think that they could use some of the tools and process ideas that you put forward. And I'll just share a couple of them. One person said, understanding operators' perspectives when investigating recurring equipment failures. Somebody else said, recognizing team members' safety concerns during high-pressure maintenance situations. Here's a good one, which comes up often, communicating technical requirements effectively to non-technical stakeholders. Sometimes that's to leadership, sometimes it's to cross-functional teams. And then the last one was anticipating how procedural changes will impact frontline workers. So really great that people are thinking on the fly and being able to apply this already to some of their own roles. Guys, this is recorded. If you're not a member of the mainstream community network online, many of you are. It's free. I will put the link to this to the network. You can join that, and you'll be able to see how you can view this or review it. I'm also going to put a link into the State of Asset Management report, which I spoke about in the beginning of the call, which literally came off the press yesterday. Great 50-page comprehensive document pulling out the 11 obstacles to achieving maintenance reliability excellence in Australia and New Zealand, well researched and all contained in that report. Lisa, over to you.
Daniel Murray, you are the most beautiful communicator, and a lot of this, we've been running this started this mainstream community in 1995, and we realized that a lot of engineers or in that sort of space of asset management, reliability, maintenance are really, really strong technically, and we kind of have uncovered that the human dimension is, when we started mainstream, the community, we made sure that in the very first conference, we brought in the human element, the heart, which is what makes everything work. So we expanded into people, process, strategy, technology. And I've got the psychology background and realized that, the more we can put human stuff, the better for everybody. And, inviting people to think like you have, is just incredible. I mean, I'm sure everyone in this hearing you like look at yourself and you kind of like, gosh, this is how so much work to do. But it's through your awareness and having conversations like this and hearing from people like you that really it's magical. And we so need it in today's world. And there's so much going on. So even more reason to manifest this beautiful kind of connection between each other. So thank you for making everybody think. Thank you for adding value. Thank you for sharing as you do with such heart and soul and authenticity. And to everyone here, amazing you turned up. It just shows it was a great turnout today. How you searching and looking to develop yourself and bringing your curiosity along. So we love this mainstream community. It's awesome to bring people together to share and exchange and learn from each other. And there are many of you here who we know well. See Melissa in the screen now, just jump to you. David, a whole lot of people are here who are pretty same hook. There are many of you here who have been supportive, are part of this community, and continue to just keep plugging into what is here for you, the exchange. And we really do value this, and we'll continue to bring you together where this peer-to-peer learning can happen. But Daniel, superstar, we've got Daniel coming to mainstream, of course, at the end of July, 28, 29 of July in Melbourne. So it'd be lovely to see you in person as well. And Daniel's always one of the highest rating speakers. It's not really the technical stuff, although that stuff is good and needed and of interest. It's sessions, the soft skills that always get rated the highest and where people go away and that's what they remember and makes the biggest impact. So thank you again, Daniel. Invaluable. Appreciate you a lot. And we'll be in touch and see you all soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Masterclass. Ciao.